I thought the worst thing my family could do that Christmas was celebrate 14 hours away without telling me. I was wrong. Dad laughed when I called and said, "If you can get to Europe tonight, come on over." Mom added, "Your sister is already here. That's enough family." Then my niece Wren stepped into the kitchen in her pajamas. Her mother had left her with me after claiming she had an emergency at work. Wren stared at my phone and asked, "So Mom's in Europe too?" The color drained from her face. A few seconds later, she whispered, "Are you also abandoned like me?" That was when she told me her teacher had already asked when she was leaving for Denmark. A few hours earlier, Christmas still looked ordinary. It was December 22nd, the first afternoon of winter break, and my dining table had disappeared under 32 sixth-grade art portfolios I had sworn I would finish grading before Christmas Eve. Wren sat on the kitchen counter beside a gingerbread house that had given up on structural integrity sometime around lunch. One wall leaned outward. The roof was slowly sliding into a puddle of icing. I pressed 2 gumdrops against the side and studied it like a contractor facing bad news. This thing is a zoning violation. Wren looked at it with the solemn concentration only an 11-year-old could give a collapsing cookie house. "At least it has affordable housing." I laughed so hard I smeared green frosting across my thumb. That was Wren. She could make a joke without changing her expression, then wait half a second to see if you caught it. She had been staying with me since Monday night. Lauren had called while I was cleaning brushes after school and said a client emergency had blown up before the holidays. She needed 2 nights, maybe 3. Could Wren stay with me? I had said yes without thinking much about it. Wren stayed over often enough that she had her own toothbrush in my bathroom, a drawer in the guest room, and 3 mismatched pairs of socks that somehow belonged nowhere else. Lauren had sounded rushed, but not frightened, and promised she would be home before the family's real Christmas plans started, so I hadn't asked questions. At the time, I was mostly thinking about groceries. My mother always made cinnamon French toast on Christmas morning, but 2 years earlier she had burned it while trying to answer 3 family calls at once, so I had started bringing an extra pan. Dad liked sausage links charred almost black. Lauren complained about sugar and then stole powdered sugar strawberries from everyone else's plates. Wren hated eggs unless they were buried under enough cheese to become legally questionable. I had most of it sitting in grocery bags by the pantry. The only thing I didn't have was a time. "Did Grandma text you?" Wren asked. I checked my phone again. Not since yesterday. Wren slid off the counter and started picking hardened icing from her fingertips. Maybe everybody's doing that thing where they assume somebody else told you. That landed a little too close to home. My family wasn't openly cruel most of the time. That would have been easier to name. They were careless in ways that always came with reasonable explanations. Lauren had more going on. Mom was overwhelmed. Dad thought someone else had called. Plans changed. I was flexible. I didn't have kids of my own. I lived nearby. I could adjust. Somehow, being the person least likely to complain had become the same thing as being the person easiest to forget. But it was Christmas. Even my family wouldn't forget Christmas. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and called Dad. He picked up on the 4th ring. There was music behind him. Not Christmas music exactly. Something bright and crowded, with glasses clinking and voices layered over one another. "Hey, Brooke. Hey, quick question. What time are we doing Christmas?" A pause. Then Dad laughed. Not a warm laugh. A caught-off-guard laugh. "If you can get to Europe tonight, come on over." I smiled automatically because my brain had not yet caught up with the sentence. "What?" "Copenhagen," he said. "We're having dinner right now." My hand stopped halfway to the refrigerator. I looked at the bags on the floor, the bread, the cinnamon, the carton of eggs. "You're in Denmark?" "Yeah." Lauren and Nolan had everything set up. It came together fast. Something cold moved through my chest. I knew about Nolan's architecture work. I knew he had been traveling more. I knew Lauren had mentioned Denmark in passing months earlier. What I did not know was that my parents had boarded a plane and crossed an ocean for Christmas. Without telling me, I sat down because my knees had gone strangely soft. Dad, when were you planning to tell me? He exhaled the way he did when he thought a conversation was becoming unnecessarily complicated. Brooke, don't do this. It was last minute. Last minute enough that nobody could send a text? He said my name again, softer this time, the warning version of it. Then Mom's voice came through the phone. Give me that. There was rustling, and then Diane Hale was in my ear sounding irritated before I had said another word. Brooke, honey, this wasn't meant to hurt you. I stared at the gingerbread house as one side finally collapsed. What was it meant to do? Lauren needed this. Nolan's family is here. His mother flew in yesterday. Everything has been so stressful lately, and this is the first time in ages your sister has looked happy. Lauren needed this. I looked toward the kitchen doorway. Ren was no longer beside the counter. My spine tightened. Mom, I said slowly, where do you think Ren is? Another pause. With you. The room suddenly felt very quiet. You knew Lauren left her with me? Of course we knew. I pressed my fingers against my temple. Does Ren know her mother is in Denmark? Mom didn't answer. I heard Dad say something in the background. Mom covered the phone for a second, but not well enough. Then she came back with a sharper tone. Lauren said Ren wanted a quiet Christmas with you. She's been emotional about all the changes, and honestly, we thought it might be better not to make everything a big issue. What changes? Brooke. What changes, Mom? Her patience snapped. Your sister is here already. That's enough family. I didn't move. I'm not sure I breathed. The words were so casual that for a second they didn't even hurt. They just sat there while the laughter and clinking silverware continued behind Mom's voice, and my grip tightened around the phone until my fingertips tingled. I could hear people laughing somewhere behind her, silverware tapping plates, somebody calling Nolan's name. My parents were at a Christmas dinner in another country, while I sat beside groceries I had bought for people who had never intended to come. I might have swallowed that. I had swallowed worse. Then I heard Ren behind me. So, Mom's in Europe too? I turned. She stood at the edge of the kitchen in flannel pajamas and one of my old college sweatshirts. Her face had gone completely still. Mom heard her. Oh, sweetheart. I pulled the phone away before she could continue. Ren looked at me, not the screen. She said it was work. My throat tightened. I ended the call. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ren asked, very softly, Are you also abandoned like me? The question went through me harder than anything Mom had said. I crossed the kitchen and crouched in front of her. No, she looked away. I corrected myself. I don't know what's going on yet. But you didn't do anything wrong. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. I didn't say I did. No, but you were thinking it. She gave me a look that said I was getting dangerously close to adult mind reading. I almost smiled. Almost. Instead, I asked what Lauren had told her. Ren said her mother's client had a crisis, and she might be gone 2 nights. She had packed Ren's school tablet, some clothes, and her favorite hoodie. Lauren had promised they would do Christmas for real once she got back. Then Ren hesitated. There was another thing. I waited. Mrs. Carver asked me if I was going to say goodbye before Denmark. I felt something tighten between my shoulder blades. Your teacher said that? She asked if I was excited. I thought she confused me with Ellie Navarro because Ellie's moving to Germany. I stood slowly. Did your mom ever tell you were moving? Ren shook her head. Did Nolan? No. Your grandparents? No. Her eyes finally met mine. Am I? I had no answer I trusted, so I called Lauren. She answered on the second try. What did you say to Ren? She asked immediately. Not hello, not Merry Christmas. What did I say to her? Mom called me. She said you upset Ren. A pulse beat hard in my neck. Her teacher already knows something about Denmark. Silence. Then Lauren sighed. Brooke, you cannot interrogate an 11-year-old about adult plans. I asked her one question. You're making her anxious. She didn't know you were in Europe. That was my decision. She thinks you abandoned her. She is emotional because you're feeding this. That sentence changed the way I listened. I stopped trying to decode Lauren's tone and paid attention to what she was actually doing. She wasn't answering my question. She was explaining Ren to me. "What exactly is being planned?" I asked. "We'll discuss it when I get home." "When is that?" "Brooke, stop." The call ended. Ren had gone upstairs. I stood in the kitchen long after the screen went dark. The gingerbread house had fully collapsed by then. One gumdrop had rolled onto the floor near my foot. I bent to pick it up and remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. When Ren was 4, I had helped open a little youth savings account for her at First Harbor Community Bank. Lauren was constantly traveling for work back then, so I had remained the adult joint owner. Jonah had occasionally put money into it: birthdays, shoes, school things. Then, according to Lauren, those deposits had stopped. Just like the calls. Just like the visits. Just like Jonah himself. I could still remember the ridiculous security phrase because Ren had laughed so hard the day we chose it that she repeated it all the way home. I found a sticky note and wrote the phrase down. The next morning, Ren came downstairs rubbing sleep from her eyes. I slid the note across the table. "We're going to the bank." She squinted at the words. "Why?" I looked at the little piece of paper between us, because for the first time in years, I no longer wanted another explanation. I wanted a fact. When they asked for the old security phrase, I said, "Read this exactly." Ren looked at me, then back at the note. And as she sounded out the ridiculous words we had chosen 7 years earlier, one question settled cold and heavy in my chest. Had Jonah really stopped remembering her? Or had all of us simply stopped checking? By 8:30 the next morning, I had already talked myself out of going to the bank 3 different times. The sticky note sat beside my coffee cup with the old security phrase written in blue ink. Ren had read it twice, laughed once, and then gone quiet. The joke had worn off. What remained was the reason we needed it. I kept thinking about calling Mom again, not because I expected honesty, because some part of me still wanted to believe there was a version of this where everyone had made one terrible Christmas decision and nothing underneath it was rotten. I picked up my phone. Ren was at the kitchen table eating dry cereal from a mug because we had run out of clean bowls. She watched me without asking who I was calling. Mom answered quickly. "Brooke, please tell me you've calmed down." That sentence told me more than an apology would have. "I want one answer," I said. "Is Lauren planning to move Ren to Denmark?" There was a pause long enough for me to hear my refrigerator kick on. Mom exhaled. "It is something they're considering. Does Ren know?" "Brooke, nothing has been decided." That wasn't my question. Her voice tightened. "You are making this much bigger than it needs to be." Across the table, Ren stopped chewing. I turned toward the window so she would not have to watch my face. Her teacher mentioned Denmark before her own mother did. We don't know exactly what the teacher said. I know exactly what Ren said, and that is the problem. Mom lowered her voice, as if making herself quieter made her kinder. She's 11. Children repeat things in ways adults don't always understand. My grip tightened around the phone. There it was again. Ren's words turned into something unreliable the second they became inconvenient. Dad's voice came faintly through the background. Then Mom handed him the phone. "Brooke." He sounded tired already. "I'm asking if Jonah agreed to this." Dad gave a short breath through his nose. "Jonah hasn't been a real father in years." The answer came too fast. "How do you know?" "What do you mean? How do I know?" "Did you talk to him?" "No." "Did Mom?" Lauren has dealt with Jonah long enough. We don't need to interrogate her every time she makes a decision for her own child. I closed my eyes. "Dad, if he still has parental rights, don't start playing lawyer. I'm not. You're a middle school art teacher, Brooke. You don't know the custody situation better than Lauren does." I felt heat climb my neck. He had always done that when I pushed too hard. He didn't shout. He made my question sound embarrassing. I looked at Ren. She had abandoned the cereal and was running one finger around the chipped rim of the mug. Dad kept talking. Copenhagen had good schools. Nolan's company was helping with housing. Ren would have opportunities. Lauren had finally found stability. A child being nervous about change did not mean adults were supposed to give up on something good. Every sentence was reasonable. That was what made it dangerous. Nobody in my family ever said, "We don't care how she feels." They said, "She'll understand later." I let Dad finish. Then I asked, "Has anybody actually asked Ren if she wants to move?" Silence. "Brooke, just answer me. She's a child." My stomach turned. I ended the call. Ren looked up. "They think I'm going?" I pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. "They think it could be good for you." "That's not what I asked." I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about how quickly she had learned to recognize adult evasion. "No," I said. "I don't think they've asked you the way they should have." She stared at the cereal for a moment. Then she slid the sticky note toward me. "Bank? Bank." First Harbor Community Bank was 10 minutes from my house, tucked between a pharmacy and a grocery store that still had a plastic Santa strapped to its roof. The lobby smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. Ren stayed close to me as we approached the desk. For a moment, I felt ridiculous. I was a 41-year-old teacher asking to see an account I legally co-owned, yet my palms were damp as Ren stood close beside me. A woman named Melissa checked my identification, confirmed the account information, then asked for the old verbal security phrase. I handed the sticky note to Ren. She frowned at it with theatrical seriousness. "Purple dinosaur pancakes." Melissa blinked. I covered my mouth. Ren looked at me. "You let me choose that?" "You were 4. That's not a defense." For the first time since the phone call with Dad, something in my chest loosened. Melissa smiled, asked another identifying question, checked my signature card, and confirmed that I was still listed as the adult joint owner. Then I asked for the recent account history. Melissa printed several pages and slid them toward me. The paper was warm from the printer. I started at the newest transactions, small deposits, $25, $40, $50, $100 on Ren's birthday. I ran my finger down the sender information. Jonah Reed. Again. Jonah Reed. Again. The date on one deposit was 9 days earlier. My skin prickled. I turned the page. More. Not every month. Not perfectly spaced. There were gaps. Long ones sometimes. But there were years of them. Ren leaned closer. "What are those?" I swallowed. "Deposits." "From who?" I looked at her. Anger rose so fast I had to set the pages flat on the table. The money did not make Jonah a good father or repair missed birthdays and weekends, but it cracked open the neat story Ren had been carrying that he had simply forgotten her. I pointed to the name. "Your dad." Ren's face changed. She did not cry. That would have been easier. She just stared. Her eyes moved down the page until she reached a memo beside one of the older transfers. School shoes. She read it twice. Then, with a shaky little breath, she said, "Did he think I had centipede feet?" A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Ren laughed too, once. Then her mouth folded in on itself. "If he remembered my birthday," she asked, "why did Mom say he forgot me?" I felt the question land like weight against my ribs. I don't know. Did Grandma know? I don't know. Did Grandpa? I don't know that either. She looked frustrated. Adults love saying they don't know when the truth is ugly. I reached across the table. "I'm not going to guess for him, Ren." She looked at my hand, then placed hers in it. "We'll ask." Finding Jonah took longer than I expected. The number I had saved for him from years ago went straight to a disconnected message. I tried an email address from an old birthday invitation and got nothing. Finally, I found another number, buried in an old contact thread from when Ren was 7. He answered after 5 rings. "Hello?" My throat went dry. "Jonah?" A pause. "Yeah, it's Brooke." Another pause, longer this time. "Brooke Hale?" "Yeah." His voice sharpened. "Is Ren okay?" The question came before hello. I looked at her sitting across from me in a molded bank chair, swinging one sneaker slowly above the floor. "She's safe," I heard Jonah exhale. Then what happened? I told him enough. Not everything, just the Europe trip. The fact that Ren had been left with me, the mention of Denmark at school. Then I asked about the bank deposits. He went quiet. "I've been putting money in that account since she was little." Lauren said you stopped. I stopped doing it monthly when work got bad. I never stopped completely. Ren watched me. I kept my voice careful. "She thinks you forgot her." This silence felt different, heavy. When Jonah finally spoke, his voice had lost its edge. "She thinks what?" I closed my eyes. He told me he still paid court, ordered support, and had asked for calls, schedule changes, and school break time. Then, before I could turn that into a defense of him, he admitted his part. "I missed time, Brooke. More than I should have." No excuses, just the sentence. I took jobs out of town because I thought being able to pay for things counted for more than it did. Then, every time I called and Lauren said Ren didn't want to talk, I told myself pushing would make it worse. My anger shifted. It didn't disappear. But it changed shape. "Why didn't you go back to court?" I should have. That answer was harder to hate. Then Jonah asked, "Why are you asking me this now?" I looked at Ren. "Because Lauren's in Copenhagen." He did not respond. "With Nolan. My parents are there too." Still nothing. And Ren's teacher already knew something about Denmark. Jonah's voice changed. "Did Lauren finally serve you something?" "No. Not me. Her." "What are you talking about?" He swore under his breath. "Lauren's lawyer mentioned relocation to mine a few weeks ago. Nothing formal. I was waiting for notice." My heartbeat picked up. Relocation. To Denmark. I stood so fast the chair legs scraped the floor. Ren flinched. I lowered my voice. "She doesn't know." "Who?" "Ren." There was dead silence. I told him about the teacher. Jonah asked which school office I had spoken to. "I haven't. I'm calling my lawyer." "Jonah, if Lauren has already started changing school plans, I need to know. Major education decisions are joint under the parenting plan." That was the first time anyone had called it what it was, a parenting plan, an actual court order rather than the vague custody stuff my family had always treated as Lauren's domain. "You still have scheduled time?" "Yes." "How much?" "1 long weekend a month, 4 weeks in summer, parts of some breaks." "Do you use it?" His pause answered before he did. "Not all of it." I appreciated the honesty, even while it made me angry. "I've missed weekends. I'm not going to lie to you." "But you never gave it up." "No." I looked at the printed bank pages. All these years, our family had talked about Jonah like a man who had walked off the edge of the earth. He had failed Ren and let distance grow, but he had not vanished. Jonah hung up to call his attorney. By lunchtime, he called back. Because he still had parental rights and joint authority over major school decisions, he had contacted the school directly. Lauren had already requested Ren's records and information for an international school application in Copenhagen. The school office had circulated the request far enough that it also explained how Mrs. Carver could have heard about Denmark before Ren did. Nothing was final, but the planning was real and far further along than Ren had been told. Jonah's lawyer contacted Lauren's lawyer that afternoon and made his position clear. Jonah did not consent to changing Ren's school outside the existing parenting plan, and he would object if Lauren formally served relocation notice. But at 4:17 p.m., my sister called. I answered in my kitchen. Her voice was so controlled it made the hair rise along my arms. "What exactly did you do?" I looked at Ren, who was sitting on the floor repairing the gingerbread house with fresh icing. I stopped assuming. Lauren inhaled. "You had no right to involve Jonah. He's her father. You don't know what you just started." "No," I said, "but I'm beginning to understand what you did." She hung up. The next morning, Dad texted me from the airport. Their remaining Copenhagen plans were canceled. Lauren wanted everyone back in Washington now that Jonah had involved an attorney, and Mom and Dad were coming with her. And for the first time since Christmas began, I wasn't wondering why they had left without us. I was wondering what they were so desperate to get home and protect. By the time Lauren walked through my front door 2 days after Christmas, I had already decided I would not give her the fight she was expecting. That decision lasted exactly 3 seconds. She stepped inside wearing a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, dragged a hard-shell suitcase over the threshold, and looked past me toward the stairs. Where's Ren? No hello, no apology, no explanation for leaving her daughter behind while the rest of the family crossed an ocean. She's upstairs reading. Lauren nodded once, as if that settled everything, then reached for the suitcase handle again. I blocked it with my foot. We're talking first. Her eyes lifted to mine. For a moment I saw the version of my sister I had known since childhood, the one who could read a room in half a second and choose exactly which face to wear. Anger would have given me something solid to push against. Instead, she softened. Fine. That scared me more. I made coffee neither of us wanted and sat across from her at my kitchen table. The gingerbread house was still there, held together by fresh icing and denial. One gumdrop chimney leaned at an angle that made it look drunk. Lauren glanced at it. Cute. It survived. So did we. There was something almost defensive in the way she said it. I folded my hands under the table so she would not see them shake. I'm listening. She blinked. I think she had expected accusations. I had expected myself to make them. Instead, I asked her to explain Copenhagen from the beginning. Lauren leaned back slowly. Nolan's firm had offered him a 3-year assignment, beginning the following summer, with housing support in a safe neighborhood near good schools and public transit. Lauren could keep most of her work remotely, and she had already looked at school calendars, healthcare, apartment layouts, and ways to bring Ren back to the United States during breaks. The amount of detail made one thing impossible to pretend. This had not come together fast. What did you tell Ren? Lauren's mouth flattened. That we might have an opportunity overseas. She didn't know that. She knew enough. She thought you were on a work trip. I wasn't going to dump a legal fight in her lap before Christmas. I watched her face. For once, I did not argue with the language. Legal fight. She had said it herself. What did you tell Nolan? Her shoulders stiffened, almost imperceptibly. That Ren would need time to adjust, and that she wanted a quiet Christmas with you instead of another trip. My jaw tightened. Did you tell him she wanted to go? I told him she was excited about parts of it. I thought about Ren staring at me in the kitchen asking if she was moving. I forced myself not to react. Lauren mistook my silence for progress. She started talking more freely. Jonah had barely used the parenting time he had been given. She had carried school meetings, dentist appointments, homework, fevers, birthday parties. Nolan had shown up more consistently in 2 years than Jonah had in 5. Some of that was true, which made the parts she left out harder to separate from the rest. You talked to Jonah, she said. I did. And now, suddenly, he's Father of the Year? No. That stopped her. I leaned back. He told me he missed weekends. He told me he used work as an excuse. He told me he should have pushed harder. Lauren stared at me. He said that? Yes. I saw the smallest flash of irritation cross her face. Jonah admitting failure was inconvenient. It made him harder to dismiss. I'm not defending him, I said. I'm trying to understand what's true. Lauren's expression changed again. Tired now, almost wounded. Brooke, I am trying to give my daughter a better life. I believed she believed that, which made the rest worse. A floorboard creaked upstairs. We both looked toward the ceiling. Lauren lowered her voice. You make it very easy for Ren to stay afraid. The sentence hit like a cold finger against the back of my neck. What does that mean? She feels safe here. That's supposed to be bad? No, but safe can become stuck. I stared at her. You think my house is why she doesn't want Denmark? I think you reinforce every hesitation she has. I didn't even know Denmark was happening. You didn't have to. There it was, A complete accusation built without an act. My existence was apparently enough. I took one slow breath. "What do you want from me?" Lauren reached into her bag. The folder she placed on the table was thin and ordinary. She slid out several stapled pages. "My lawyer drafted this. I did not touch it." "What is it?" "A supporting declaration." "For what?" "For the relocation case, if Jonah decides to turn this into one." My pulse kicked hard enough that I felt it in my throat. Lauren pushed the pages closer. "It just explains your role." I looked down. The first paragraph described me as Lauren's sister and Wren's aunt. The second called me an occasional family support person who provides intermittent childcare. My mouth went dry. I kept reading. Lauren had continuously handled Wren's daily care. Brooke occasionally assisted with school pickup. Brooke supported Lauren's efforts to provide stability. Brooke believed Wren was capable of transitioning successfully to Copenhagen. I read that sentence twice, then a third time. I never said this. It's not a quote. I don't believe this. It says capable of transitioning. You know what it implies. Lauren rubbed her forehead. "Brooke, every declaration uses broad language. I'm not signing broad language about a child. It's not about the child. It's about your role. My role is the part you're lying about." Her head came up. "Excuse me?" "Wren stayed here 3 nights last week, 2 the week before. I picked her up from school 4 times in November." "You're keeping score now?" "No, you are. You just wrote it down wrong." The front door opened behind us. Dad and Mom had arrived without knocking. Of course they had. Dad took one look at the papers and exhaled like he had walked into a meeting he had hoped would already be over. "Brooke, please don't turn this into another battle." I felt something bitter rise in my throat. "Another battle?" Mom removed her gloves slowly. "Lauren told us what she's asking. It's a statement. That's all." I tapped the page. "It says I barely take care of Wren." "You're her aunt," Dad said. "And?" "You are not her parent." "I never said I was." "Then why are you making this personal?" I almost laughed. Lauren had asked me to sign a legal declaration about my own relationship with Wren, and somehow my objection to the wording was evidence I was making it personal. Mom sat beside Lauren. "Legal fights get expensive. Nobody wants that." Lauren looked exhausted now, and Mom immediately put a hand over hers. There it was again. Lauren hurt. Everyone moved toward her. I hurt. Everyone explained why I should understand. I stared at the signature line. For years, the imbalance in our family had lived in ordinary choices, who got forgiven, accommodated, or expected to adjust. This was the first time someone had asked me to put that imbalance into writing. I slid the declaration back. "I'm not signing this." Lauren's jaw tightened. "You haven't even read all of it." I read enough. "You could cost Wren this opportunity." "No, your facts could." Dad pushed away from the table. "God, Brooke." His disappointment hit an old place in me. For a second, I was 16 again, being told Lauren had made a mistake, and I needed to be mature enough not to make it worse. My hands started trembling under the table. I stood before anyone could see. "I need some air." Lauren gave a humorless laugh. "Of course you do. I left anyway." 3 hours later, I met Jonah at a coffee shop halfway between my house and the freeway. He looked older than I remembered. Broader through the shoulders, more gray at his temples, exhaustion carved into the skin beneath his eyes. He stood when I approached. I sat without offering a hug. He seemed relieved. The coffee was awful. He took one sip, grimaced, and said, "I've had rooftop service coffee that tasted less like insulation." A laugh slipped out of me before I could stop it. Then I remembered why we were there. Jonah pulled a folded copy of the 2021 parenting plan from his jacket, the ordinary court order that had existed while the rest of us spoke about him, as if he had no legal connection to Wren at all. It gave him regular weekends, summer and holiday time, and joint authority over major educational decisions. Then he showed me his calendar. Some weekends were marked. Others were crossed out. "I missed these," he said. "How many?" "Too many." "Why?" "Work. Distance. Sometimes because Lauren said Ren didn't want to come. And you just accepted that? His face tightened. More than once. I sat back. That isn't good enough. I know. He did not defend it or blame Lauren. The plain admission made it harder to keep him inside the version of him I had carried for years. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. I thought paying support, keeping insurance, asking for time, that meant I was still showing up somehow. It meant you were paying support. He nodded. I know that now too. The anger I had brought with me lost some of its heat. He had not earned forgiveness, but he was willing to admit facts that made him look worse. I told him about the declaration. His expression changed. What does she call you? Occasional family support. He let out a short breath. That's why she wants your signature. I looked at him. He turned the parenting plan toward me. If she wants to relocate, she's going to argue that Ren's real center of life moves with Lauren, Nolan, the stable household, the future. And me? You're inconvenient. The word landed hard. He continued carefully. If you sign something saying you're peripheral, you solve that problem for her. I felt cold move through my arms. This was bigger than my sister insulting me, bigger than Christmas. Lauren wasn't asking me to support her future. She was asking me to help rewrite Ren's past. Jonah folded the parenting plan again. Once she formally serves notice, everything gets more serious. How serious? She's asking a court to believe her version. I looked through the coffee shop window at rain streaking the glass. For years, Lauren had been able to reshape every argument after it happened. Now she wanted to put one version into a legal record. And for the first time, I understood why she needed me so badly. My signature wasn't support. It was erasure. For the next 3 days, I kept thinking about one word Jonah had used. Peripheral. Lauren wanted me close enough to be useful and far enough away to be harmless. That realization did something strange to my anger. It cooled it. Not because I was less furious, but because fury had finally become precise. When Lauren called me on December 30th and asked if I had thought more clearly about the declaration, I told her I had. I'll look at a corrected version. She went quiet. I could almost hear the relief settling into her voice. Okay, but I'm not signing adjectives. What does that even mean? It means no occasional, no intermittent, no continuous. Give me dates. Give me actual tasks. If you want me to swear to something, write what happened. Lauren gave a short laugh. You're being ridiculous. Then it should be easy to fix. There was a pause. Fine. The revised draft arrived that afternoon. I opened it at my dining table with a red pen beside me, which felt embarrassingly teacher-like, even for me. Lauren had taken my challenge seriously. Too seriously. Instead of vague phrases, the declaration now described specific stretches of time when she claimed Ren had been primarily and continuously in her care. The draft claimed stretches in October, November, and December when Ren had been primarily and continuously in Lauren's care. I knew the dates because I had lived the gaps inside them. 4 nights at my house during Lauren's Chicago launch, a Thursday to Sunday stay while she worked in San Francisco, and 2 school nights when she joined Nolan on a Boston trip. I went back through my phone to make sure memory was not flattering me. The ordinary messages were still there: pickup requests, delayed flights, sleepover questions, quick thank yous, each one tying Lauren's broad language to a day I could actually remember. Lauren had not been hiding a secret life. She had simply become used to treating my help as invisible the moment it stopped being convenient to admit it existed. When I saw her 2 days later at Mom and Dad's house, I brought the declaration with me. I also brought a streak of blue tempera paint down the sleeve of my sweater because apparently washing my hands after a holiday art program was not enough to protect my dignity. Ren noticed it first. She leaned toward me in the hallway and whispered, "You look more legally qualified now." I looked down at the stain. Good. I was worried the cardigan made me look unprepared. Her mouth twitched. That tiny smile steadied me more than it should have. Lauren was waiting in the living room with Dad and Mom. She had printed another clean copy. I sat across from them. I checked the dates. Lauren folded her arms. And? They're wrong. Dad rubbed his forehead. Brooke. I held up one hand. Not emotionally wrong, factually wrong. Lauren's expression sharpened. I was with my daughter. Not every night you listed. That doesn't mean I wasn't her primary parent. I didn't say it did. That stopped her. I turned toward Dad. Were you with Ren October 8th through 12th? He frowned. How would I remember that? Exactly. Lauren's eyes narrowed. What are you doing? I'm asking whether the people you're naming as corroborating family members actually know what they're corroborating. Mom shifted beside Dad. Brooke, nobody is asking us to testify. Not yet. The room changed after that. Just slightly. Dad looked at Lauren. You listed us? Lauren's jaw tightened. As family support, that's normal. That's not what I asked. I watched something unfamiliar happen between them. Dad wasn't defending me. He was protecting himself. But for the first time, those two instincts pointed in the same direction. He picked up the draft and started reading. Mom looked uncomfortable. I turned to her. Do you remember Ren staying with me when Lauren went to Chicago? Mom hesitated. Lauren said, Mom. That one word carried a warning. Mom looked down at her hands. She stayed with Brooke more than once. How often? I don't know. Neither do I exactly, I said. That's why I'm not signing occasional or continuous. Lauren stood. This is insane. No, this is specific. You're turning family life into evidence. I felt the anger rise again, hot under my ribs. You did that when you asked us to put our names on it. Dad looked up from the pages. I'm not verifying dates I don't remember. Lauren stared at him. The look on her face was almost disbelief. Seriously? I'm saying I won't swear to something I can't personally confirm. You know I've raised her. That's not the same question. Mom reached for Lauren's wrist. Sweetheart, nobody is against you. Lauren pulled away. Her eyes found mine. This is what you wanted. I shook my head. No, I wanted you to stop speaking in generalizations when the details mattered. She laughed once, without humor. You think details are going to save you? The sentence lodged under my skin. Save me from what? Before I could ask, she grabbed her bag and walked out. The first formal papers arrived for Jonah the following week. He called me after work. I was sitting alone in my classroom, washing dried paint from plastic pallets while rain tapped against the windows. She served notice. I set the sponge down. The relocation notice? Yeah. His voice was tight but controlled. June 15th. That was the proposed move date. Not someday, not maybe. June 15th. I wrote it on a scrap of paper even though I knew I would not forget it. Jonah's attorney filed his objection within the required time and asked the court to preserve Ren's current residence and school while the dispute was pending. The process moved through deadlines and waiting instead of one dramatic ruling. By late January, a temporary hearing left the larger relocation question unresolved but kept Ren's principal residence and current school in place while the case continued. Jonah called me afterward with the news. I sat on the edge of my bed after the call ended, staring at the wall. Relief came first, then guilt. Lauren was still Ren's mother. Copenhagen was still a real opportunity. Nolan's assignment was legitimate. I did not want to become the kind of person who celebrated every obstacle in Lauren's path simply because I was angry. But there was one thing I could not feel guilty about. Ren would not wake up one morning and discover her life had already been packed for her. Not yet. The order did not stop Nolan from going to Denmark or Lauren from planning her own future, but it stopped them from treating Ren's school and household as settled facts. Dad called the situation a mess. Mom called it heartbreaking, and Lauren called it sabotage. Then Jonah sent me a photo of one paragraph from Lauren's formal relocation materials. I was sitting in my classroom during lunch when it came through. At first, I did not understand why he had circled the sentence. Then I read it again. Ren was described as enthusiastic about the proposed relocation. She had, according to the filing, repeatedly expressed excitement about living in Copenhagen and viewed the move as a positive family transition. My skin went cold. I heard the school cafeteria noise through the wall. Trays clattering, kids yelling, a chair scraping across tile. The normal world kept moving, while I stared at a sentence that felt almost obscene. I thought about Ren standing in my kitchen on December 22nd. Am I moving? I thought about her face when she learned Lauren was already in Europe. I thought about the teacher who had known more than she did. Lauren had not just hidden the plan. She had already turned Ren's silence into consent. I called Jonah. Where did this come from? The filing. Did anyone ask Ren? I don't know. I do. My voice sounded strange even to me. She didn't know. Jonah was quiet. I stood and walked to the window. Rain blurred the parking lot into gray streaks. And then something clicked into place so cleanly that I felt my stomach drop. Copenhagen, Christmas, Nolan's family, Maris. All those people sitting around a table celebrating a future that supposedly included Ren. But Ren had not been there. Not because she was difficult. Not because Lauren wanted mother-daughter time later. Not because everyone thought she preferred my house. She could not be there because somebody might have looked across a Christmas dinner table and asked her the most ordinary question in the world. Are you excited to move here? And Lauren could not risk hearing the answer. By the time Nolan invited everyone to my parents' house for dinner, I already knew there would be no peaceful version of that evening. He called it a reset. That was his word. A chance to get everybody in the same room, lower the temperature, and stop turning Ren's future into a family war. I almost said no. Then I thought about Lauren's filing and the sentence claiming Ren was excited to move to Copenhagen. So I went. Mom had made pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and one of those salads nobody actually wanted but everybody politely took a spoonful of. The house smelled the way it had. When Lauren and I were kids, rosemary, butter, coffee, and for one dangerous second, standing in the hallway with my coat still on. I wanted to believe we could sit down and become a normal family again. Then I saw Lauren at the dining table, with a clean copy of the Declaration beside her plate. Hope left my body like air from a punctured tire. Nolan stood near the fireplace talking to Dad. He looked tired, not angry. Tired in the way people look when they have spent too long trying to convince themselves that two incompatible stories can somehow both be true. Ren was sitting on the stairs with her knees pulled to her chest. When she saw me, she lifted one hand. I smiled. Lauren noticed. Of course she did. Dinner's almost ready, Mom said too brightly. Nobody moved. Finally, Nolan cleared his throat. I know everybody's exhausted by this. Dad gave a low grunt of agreement. Nolan continued carefully. But I think we've gotten so far into attorneys and paperwork that we're forgetting there's a real kid in the middle of it. That was a reasonable sentence. It was also the first time anybody had said something all night that did not make my jaw tighten. I took off my coat. I agree. Lauren looked at me sharply. Nolan seemed relieved. Good, then maybe we can start there. We sat down. For 10 minutes, nobody mentioned Denmark. Mom passed potatoes. Dad asked Nolan about the office he would be working from. Ren pushed green beans around her plate. I watched Lauren watch everybody else. That was one of her gifts. She could tell when a room was ready to move on. After dessert, she reached for the Declaration. Since we're all here, she said, I think we should settle one small thing. My stomach hardened. Nolan looked at the papers. Lauren, it's not a fight. She slid them toward me. I softened the wording. I did not touch them. What do you want me to say? That you've helped with Ren, that she's close to you, that you support her adjusting successfully if relocation is approved. That last part isn't a fact. It's an opinion. Exactly. Lauren leaned back. Brooke, you teach 11-year-olds. You know kids adapt. I know they deserve to be asked what they think. Her mouth tightened. There it was. The line neither of us could step around anymore. Dad put down his coffee. Can we not turn this into another argument about whether an 11-year-old gets to decide an international move? I never said she gets to decide. You keep acting like she should. No, I keep acting like her feelings should belong to her. Lauren laughed softly. Oh, come on. Something hot moved through my chest. I looked at Nolan. You said this was about remembering there's a real kid in the middle. He nodded slowly. Then let's do that. Lauren's eyes narrowed. I kept my voice level. I'm going to say what I know is true, Mom whispered. Brooke. I ignored her. Ren did not understand before Christmas that the Denmark plan had gotten this far. Jonah did not disappear in the total way we were all told. I will not sign an opinion about what Ren wants. And if a lawyer, investigator, school, or court asks me what I personally observed, I'm going to tell the truth. Silence filled the room. Lauren stared at me. Then she smiled, not because she was amused, because she had decided what I was. I knew it. Nolan frowned. Knew what? She did not look at him. She wants this. My throat tightened. What do I want? To be necessary. The words hit with almost no warning. Lauren leaned forward. You like being the safe house, the fun aunt, the one who never makes Ren do anything hard. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's not what this is about. It is exactly what this is about. Lauren. No, Dad, let her hear it. Her voice rose for the first time. You don't have kids, Brooke. You don't have to be the bad guy. You get art projects and sleepovers and grilled cheese at 10 o'clock. I get braces, appointments, school forms, discipline, bills, every miserable decision that makes a kid hate you for 10 minutes. I gripped the edge of the table. Part of what she said was true. That was what made it hurt. I did get easier moments, but I also got the nights Lauren missed flights home, the mornings Ren woke up sick, the evenings she stared at her phone after Jonah failed to call. I could have listed all of it. I did not. Lauren pointed toward me. You make staying easy. I swallowed. So, this is my fault? I'm saying you reinforce every fear she has. About a move she didn't know was real? Her face flickered. Just once. Nolan looked between us. I've heard Ren talk about Europe, he said. I turned to him. Did she ever tell you she wanted to move there? He hesitated. She said Copenhagen looked cool. That's not what I asked. Lauren sat up straighter. Don't interrogate him. I looked at Nolan. Did she ever say, I want to move to Denmark, when Lauren wasn't answering with her? His mouth opened, then closed. I had my answer. Mom made a small sound. Dad pushed his chair back. This is exactly the problem. Every word is being treated like evidence. A voice drifted down from the stairs. Adults are really bad at private conversations. Everyone froze. Ren was still sitting there. She looked embarrassed now that 6 adults were staring at her. Lauren's face changed immediately. Ren, go upstairs. I was already upstairs. You know what I mean. Ren stood. For a second, I thought she would obey. Then she looked at me. I could not know exactly what she wanted, but the fear in her face was enough to make me stand. I stood too. No. Lauren's head snapped toward me. What? Don't send her away so we can talk about what she thinks. Brooke, sit down. I'm done doing this. My legs were shaking, but my voice was not. I looked at every adult in that room. I'm done telling you what Ren means. I'm also done letting you tell me. Dad's face went hard. Lauren's eyes flashed. I turned toward Ren. If somebody who's supposed to be neutral asks you what you think, tell them, whatever it is. Lauren shoved back from the table. Stop coaching her. I just told her not to give anybody my answer. You are unbelievable. No, what's unbelievable is that everybody in this room has spent months describing her feelings like she isn't capable of having them. Ren's chin trembled. That nearly broke me. I wanted to go to her. I did not. Even comforting her too quickly would have looked like choosing a side for her, so I stayed where I was. Lauren saw that too, and something in her expression hardened. Fine. She stood very still. If this is how you want it, fine. The room went cold. She turned toward Ren. Get your coat. Ren blinked. What? Relieving. Mom rose halfway from her chair. Lauren, maybe everybody needs to cool down. No. Lauren looked at me. You want boundaries. We're going to have boundaries. My stomach dropped. She spoke with terrifying calm. No more school pickups. No more random sleepovers. No more keeping her overnight because my flight is late. No more taking her to appointments because it's convenient. Wren's face went white. Mom, Lauren cut her off. This isn't your fault. The irony was so sharp I almost laughed. Almost. I stepped forward. Don't punish her because you're angry at me. I'm not punishing her. You're cutting off the routine she's had for years. I'm her mother. I know. Do you? That one landed. Lauren picked up the declaration and folded it once. You have spent weeks telling everybody else they're speaking for Wren. Meanwhile, you've made yourself the person she runs to every time she's uncomfortable. I never asked her to choose me. You didn't have to. She looked toward the stairs. Coat, Wren. Wren moved slowly. Every instinct in me wanted to stop her. Call Jonah. Do something that would keep Wren in the house for one more night. But Lauren still had majority residential time. She was taking her daughter home, and there was nothing I could turn into a factual objection to stop it. Wren walked past me with her backpack over one shoulder. I touched her sleeve. Nothing more. Her eyes filled. So I can't come over? Lauren answered before I could. Not for a while. Wren looked at me. I forced myself to breathe. This is not your fault. Her lips pressed together. Then she nodded. The front door closed behind them. I stood in Mom's hallway, staring at the empty space. My hands had gone completely numb. Dad said something about everyone needing time. Mom said Lauren would calm down. Nolan said nothing. I barely heard any of them. Because for the first time since this began, Lauren had found something I could not protect with facts. She had found the one thing I loved enough to make me afraid of telling the truth. Wren. For the first week after Lauren stopped letting Wren come over, I kept listening for sounds that were no longer there. Her backpack hitting the floor by my front door. The upstairs bathroom fan running too long because she forgot to turn it off. The cabinet opening at 10 at night when she went looking for crackers and pretended she wasn't hungry enough to need a plate. My house did not become quiet all at once. It became quiet in pieces. That was worse. On Monday, I finished school at 3:15 and automatically drove toward Wren's middle school before remembering I was no longer on the pickup list. I was halfway there when it hit me. My foot came off the gas, so suddenly the car behind me honked. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and sat gripping the steering wheel until the leather left red marks in my palms. Lauren had not needed a judge or a dramatic confrontation. She had changed the permissions she controlled, and ordinary systems obeyed. That afternoon, the school secretary sent a polite email confirming that my name was no longer on Wren's approved pickup list. The message was neutral enough to make the loss feel almost administrative. At work, I tried to pretend nothing was wrong. I showed 12-year-olds how to mix complementary colors, while my own family was quietly repainting me as a problem. One of my students asked why I had put a brush into a cup of clean water, and then stared at it for almost a full minute. Miss Hale? I blinked. Sorry. He grinned. You buffering? That got a laugh out of the table. I smiled because he deserved one. Then I went into the supply closet during lunch and stood between boxes of construction paper until the pressure behind my eyes passed. The family version of events spread through quiet conversations rather than public accusations. A cousin stopped answering my texts. An aunt suggested I give Lauren space to parent, and eventually Dad's view made its way back to me. I had become too emotionally attached to Wren because I did not have children of my own. When I confronted Dad, he did not deny it. I said you may not understand how hard it is for a parent to make decisions a child doesn't like. My body went cold from the inside out. That is not the same thing. I didn't say you were dangerous. You implied I was interfering because I'm childless. He sighed. Brooke, everything is not an attack. That sentence almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I said, You keep saying that after attacking me." He was quiet. Then he told me Lauren was under enormous pressure. Nolan's job timeline had not changed. The legal bills were climbing, and Wren was upset because everyone keeps pulling her in different directions. The word everyone spread responsibility so thin, nobody had to hold it. "I'm not pulling her anywhere." "You got Jonah involved." "He was already her father." Dad hung up 10 seconds later. I stood in my kitchen with the phone still against my ear and felt something harden behind my ribs. I had spent most of my life believing Dad's calmness meant fairness. Now I understood that sometimes calmness was just a cleaner way to dismiss somebody. The next blow came from Nolan. He called me on a Thursday evening. I almost did not answer. When I did, he sounded cautious. Not angry. That made it harder. "I wanted you to hear this from me." My stomach tightened. "Hear what?" Lauren's attorney asked me for a declaration. I leaned against the counter. "And you gave one?" "Yes." I closed my eyes. He explained that he had described his relationship with Lauren, the Copenhagen assignment, the housing support, and what he had observed about Wren. Then he said he had described me as loving but unusually involved. The phrase hit me like a slap disguised as concern. Unusually involved. I didn't mean it as an insult. "What did you mean?" He hesitated. "That your house has become a big part of how Wren handles stress. She comes here because Lauren asks me to keep her." "I know." "No, you know what Lauren told you." His voice hardened slightly. "Brooke, every family has messy childcare arrangements. This is not about babysitting." "I know that." "Do you?" There was a pause. Then Nolan said something that hurt because I believed he meant it. "I think you are risking a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Wren because the paperwork doesn't perfectly describe how everybody feels." My fingers curled against the edge of the counter. "Paperwork?" "I'm saying the language isn't always perfect." She didn't know she was moving. "That doesn't mean the move is bad." "I never said it was." "You're acting like it is." "No. I'm acting like she's allowed to be scared." He exhaled. "I've heard her sound excited about Denmark." I remembered our conversation at Mom's house. "Did she tell you she wanted to move?" Silence. "Nolan." He did not answer. Nolan did not sound cruel or stupid. He sounded like a man protecting a future he had already pictured, and that made him willing to treat supporting facts as reasonable and opposing facts as excessive. "I hope Copenhagen works out for you," I said. He sounded startled. "Brooke." "But wanting it doesn't make everybody else wrong." I ended the call before my voice broke. That night, I sat on the floor of Wren's room. I had never called it that out loud. It was the guest room, but there was a purple blanket she had picked, 2 paper stars taped crookedly above the desk, a ceramic fox with one ear missing, 3 library books overdue enough to qualify as permanent residents. I picked up the fox. My throat closed. For weeks, I had told myself I was protecting Wren's right to be heard. Sitting alone in the guest room, I had to admit something less flattering. I wanted her back at my table, under my roof, laughing at my terrible gingerbread architecture. Missing her was not wrong, but it showed me how easily love could become an argument for keeping someone close. I put the ceramic fox down. My hands were shaking. The next morning, Jonah called. His attorney was considering whether to ask for broader temporary relief before the final hearing. "What do you think?" he asked. I stood in my classroom before first period, staring at a row of drying watercolor landscapes. "I think you should follow your lawyer's advice." "That's not what I asked." I swallowed. He waited. Part of me wanted Jonah to push harder, partly because I missed Wren, and partly because I wanted Lauren to feel some of the panic she had caused. That was exactly why I had to be careful. "I think," I said slowly, "we cannot turn this into everybody fighting over who gets Wren." Jonah was quiet. "She's already in the middle." "I know." "No. I mean, we can't make the answer worse." I sat on the edge of my desk. "The goal cannot be getting her away from Lauren. It can't be getting her to choose you. And it definitely can't be getting her back to me." The last sentence scraped on the way out. Jonah understood. "So what is the goal?" I looked toward the empty desks. To make sure nobody gets to invent her answer, he breathed out slowly. Okay, that was all. And the absence of a speech or promise was oddly reassuring. That evening, I stayed late at school cleaning brushes. My phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the message. Ask Nolan, who actually answered every time his mother tried to ask Ren about Denmark. I stared at the screen. My pulse jumped. A second message appeared before I could respond, and ask why Ren was suddenly too tired for every private video call after Thanksgiving. I read both messages again. There was no name, only 2 sentences from someone who seemed to have watched Lauren from Nolan's side of the family. Until then, every challenge to Lauren's story had come from someone she could dismiss as emotional, absent, confused, or over-involved. But this sounded like somebody from Nolan's side. Somebody who had been inside the future Lauren was trying to protect. I typed one question. Who is this? The message showed as delivered. No answer came. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. Nothing. I looked at the dark classroom windows and wondered whether someone inside Lauren's perfect Copenhagen story had already started noticing the cracks. The anonymous number stayed silent for 2 days. By Friday, the question it had planted was still with me, but chasing it would only give Lauren another reason to say I was interfering. I needed to change tactics. So I called Lauren. She answered cautiously. What? I want to meet. For what? To stop this. Silence. I could almost hear her recalculating. We met the next morning at a coffee shop near my parents' neighborhood. I chose a table by the window, not because I was trying to be strategic, but because I needed sunlight. The last few weeks had made every room feel smaller than it was. Lauren arrived 10 minutes late. She did not apologize. She sat down, left her coat on, and looked at me like she was waiting for the trick. I had one, just not the kind she expected. I'm done fighting you and the family, I said. Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means I'm not calling Nolan. I'm not arguing about Denmark with Mom and Dad. I'm not discussing legal outcomes with Ren. If somebody in the process asks me for facts, I'll answer them. That's it. Lauren studied my face. You expect me to believe you suddenly found boundaries? My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice level. I found mine. That answer irritated her. Good. Not because I wanted to win the conversation, because irritation made her stop looking for weakness. I continued. If your lawyer wants a declaration from me, I'll provide one. Dates, pickups, nights Ren stayed with me. Things I personally did. I'm not signing opinions about what she should want. Lauren leaned back. For the first time in weeks, relief softened her shoulders. She thought I was giving up. I can live with that, she said. I almost laughed. Of course she could. She heard retreat. What I meant was that I would give the process facts, and nothing she could stretch into an opinion. Mom called me that afternoon. Her voice shook with relief. Lauren said you two talked. We did. I'm glad. I really am. Dad got on the phone and told me this was the first reasonable thing I had done since Christmas. I let him have the sentence. A month earlier, I would have needed to correct him. Now, I understood that not every wrong conclusion required my labor. By then, the temporary order was already in place, keeping Ren's school and principal residence unchanged while the relocation case moved forward. Jonah's attorney told him the court had appointed a parenting investigator to look at the broader situation. I was contacted the following week. The investigator's name was Dr. Elaine Foster. She did not sound impressed by anybody. I liked her immediately. Not because she was on my side, because she did not appear to have one. She asked me to describe my relationship with Ren. Lauren's labels kept trying to follow me into the interview, so I answered like a witness instead of an advocate. I described the ordinary pattern of pickups, overnights, late flights, school mornings, and the times Lauren herself had asked me to step in. Dr. Foster asked whether I believed Ren should remain in Washington. The old version of me would have answered too fast. Instead, I said, I believe she should be able to tell you what she thinks without one of us translating it." There was a pause. "Then, Doctor," Foster asked, "that wasn't my question." Heat rose into my face. She was right. I took a breath. "If you're asking my personal opinion, yes. I think moving her that far right now would be hard on her. But I also know I'm not neutral." "Good," she said, and moved on. "When Dr. Foster asked for ways to verify routine, rather than rely on memory, I gave her the ordinary material I had. Lauren's pickup and overnight texts, school confirmations, my calendar, the bank history, and names of people who had seen the routine themselves. She was interested in what could be checked, not how forcefully any of us could explain it." Jonah was interviewed separately. He told me afterward that Dr. Foster had made him walk through every missed weekend. Not why he missed them, which ones. "How bad was it?" I asked. He rubbed his face over the phone. "Bad enough that I stopped trying to make myself sound good." "That might be the first useful thing you've done." He laughed once. "Fair," Jonah gave Dr. Foster his work history, parenting records, support records, and old messages. Some helped him. Others showed how readily he had accepted Lauren's claim that Wren did not want contact. The process was forcing each of us to live with facts that did not flatter us. Lauren allowed me one supervised afternoon with her in February. We met at my parents' house because apparently my kitchen had become too dangerous for unsupervised acrylic paint. Wren carried her sketchbook in under one arm and barely looked at Lauren when she left us at the dining table with Mom in the next room. I had printed a few Copenhagen reference photos from school because Wren liked drawing buildings. She picked one photo with a canal, bicycles, old brick facades, and a white swan drifting near the edge. 20 minutes later, her swan looked like it wanted to fight somebody. I leaned over. "That bird has seen things." Wren kept painting. "It's Danish." "Are Danish swans angry?" "This one is." I nodded solemnly. "Then I respect its culture." Her mouth twitched. Then she laughed. It came out suddenly and disappeared almost as fast. But for 3 seconds, we were back in my kitchen with the crooked gingerbread house. My chest hurt in the best possible way. I kept the investigator in the case out of our afternoon, even though every question I did not ask sat at the back of my throat. When the afternoon ended, Wren held up the painting. The canal was beautiful. The buildings leaned slightly. The swan looked homicidal. "Can I leave this here?" she asked. "Sure." "Don't fix the bird." I wouldn't dare. She hugged me quickly before Lauren came back. Not long enough to be dramatic. Long enough. A week later, the unknown number texted again. "Public place. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Harbor Bean on 6th. Come alone." My stomach turned. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. The next morning, I arrived early and chose a table near the front window. At 10:03, an older woman walked in wearing a navy wool coat and carrying a plain leather purse. I recognized her immediately. Maris Pierce, Nolan's mother. I had only met her twice in person, but I had seen her face often enough on video calls. She ordered tea, sat across from me, and removed her gloves finger by finger. "I'm the one who texted you." I said nothing for a second. "Why anonymously?" "Because Nolan is my son. Lauren may become my daughter-in-law, and I didn't want to be drafted into their fight." "Then why are you here?" Maris looked toward the window. "Because I finally realized silence was also a choice." That sentence settled between us. Before Christmas, Maris had tried several times to ask Wren ordinary questions about Denmark, what she thought of the schools, the apartment pictures, even which kind of room she might like. Lauren kept answering first, explaining that Wren was excited, overwhelmed, tired, or shy, before Wren could say much herself. "At first, I thought Lauren was helping," Maris said. "Parents do that." "Then, what changed?" I realized I had heard 20 versions of how Wren felt, and almost none of them from Wren. A chill moved across my arms. Maris wrapped both hands around her tea. After Thanksgiving, I asked Nolan if I could call Wren privately. Every time, something came up. Homework, Bedtime. A headache. She was tired. Did Nolan know? I don't know. That answer mattered. She was not trying to make him guilty by association. Do you think Wren should stay here? I asked. Maris looked at me sharply. I don't know where Wren should live. For some reason, I trusted her more because of that. She continued, I know Copenhagen. I know Nolan. I know Lauren loves her daughter. And I know I never heard that child say she wanted to move there. My pulse beat hard in my throat. Would you tell Dr. Foster that? Maris looked down at her tea, then back at me. Yes. I sat very still. For months, Lauren had explained away every contradiction by discrediting the person behind it. Maris was harder to fit into that pattern because she belonged to the future Lauren wanted, and she was willing to tell Dr. Foster what she had seen. Maris did exactly what she promised. She spoke to Dr. Foster. I knew that much because Dr. Foster called me 2 days later and asked one question I had not expected. Did you ever hear Maris Pierce ask Wren directly about Denmark? I stood in the supply room at school with a roll of butcher paper balanced against my hip. Yes. How many times? I closed my eyes and searched my memory instead of reaching for the answer that would help me most. Twice, that I remember clearly. Maybe 3, but I'm sure about 2. What happened? Lauren answered. What did Wren do? I pictured the video calls, Lauren leaning into frame, Wren sitting beside her, a question directed toward the child, followed by an adult answer arriving before Wren had time to decide what she wanted to say. She got quiet. Dr. Foster paused. Did she appear afraid? I don't know. I had learned to leave uncertainty where it belonged. She got quiet, I repeated. All right. The call ended 2 minutes later. I stood there with butcher paper cutting into my palm and felt an odd mixture of relief and fear. For the first time since Christmas, I was not trying to push the story toward an outcome. I was watching pieces of it leave my hands. Dr. Foster interviewed the family and the relevant witnesses separately. I did not know what Wren said, and the not knowing bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Still, I did not ask. If I believed she deserved one place where adults did not immediately filter her words, I had to tolerate being outside that room. March arrived in a blur of scheduling, records, and waiting. Lauren and Jonah went to mediation without me, which was a useful reminder that however personal the fight felt, the legal dispute was theirs. She wanted to relocate Wren, and he objected. By late afternoon, Jonah texted me 2 words, "No deal." I stared at the message. Part of me felt disappointed. Part of me felt relieved. A settlement could have ended the uncertainty. It also could have left everybody wondering whether Wren's real life had ever been fully examined. Jonah called later. Nothing blew up, he said. What happened? Lauren offered a bigger summer block, longer holidays, video calls, and Denmark is still Denmark. I understood. A longer summer did not make Spokane closer to Copenhagen. It did not make school concerts easier to attend or sick days easier to share. Still, I asked, was she unreasonable? Jonah hesitated. No. That surprised me. She thinks it can work, he said. That's the problem. She really thinks it can work. I sat down at my kitchen table. The old gingerbread house was gone by then. I had finally thrown it away in January, after discovering the icing had achieved a structural hardness unavailable to modern concrete. What happens now? Hearing. When? Late April, maybe early May. The date made my stomach clench. Weeks. More waiting. A few days later, I was asked to attend a pre-hearing meeting because Lauren's attorney might call me as a witness, and there were questions about the declaration she had wanted me to sign. The downtown conference room had bad fluorescent lighting, legal pads, lukewarm water, and people trying not to look tired. I arrived early. Lauren came in 5 minutes later wearing a navy suit. For a second, looking at her across the room, I remembered teaching her how to braid friendship bracelets when we were kids. That memory hurt more than anger. She took the chair opposite me. Neither of us spoke until the attorney stepped out briefly to deal with a scheduling issue. Then Lauren leaned back. "You look comfortable." I almost smiled. "I'm sitting in a plastic chair." "You know what I mean." I did. She thought I had found confidence because the process was turning against her. That wasn't quite true. I had found less need to control it. Lauren looked toward the closed door. "When this is over, Ren is going to have a life bigger than your spare bedroom." The words slipped under my ribs. Months earlier, I would have defended the purple blanket, the art supplies. Every night Ren had slept there because Lauren's flight was delayed. This time, I let the insult sit without helping Lauren turn it into another debate. Lauren's eyes narrowed. Silence had always bothered her when she could not define it. The attorneys returned before she could try again. The investigator's report became available not long after that. I was not a party, but while I was being prepared as a possible witness, the conclusions relevant to my testimony were summarized for me. Doctor, Foster's picture was balanced enough to make simple accusations difficult. Lauren and Ren had a strong bond. Copenhagen offered real advantages. Jonah had been inconsistent without being absent, and my role in Ren's daily routine had been larger than Lauren's early descriptions suggested. The report did not erase Lauren's strengths or Copenhagen's appeal. It also did not erase the documented gaps in Jonah's parenting or turn my caregiving into parenthood. What it did was make the competing claims measurable enough that none of us could rely only on a label. The part involving Ren was harder to hear. She had not understood before Christmas how far the relocation planning had advanced, and she was not currently enthusiastic about moving. Most painful was the summary that she sometimes felt adults decided what she meant before she had finished saying it. I set down the notes from my witness preparation and stared at the table until the words stopped blurring. Maris's observations supported the concern about Lauren answering for Ren, while Nolan genuinely remembered Ren sounding positive about Copenhagen. Jonah, meanwhile, could not hide his missed time behind Lauren's behavior. The report left the central problem intact rather than simplifying it. Denmark offered real benefits, but the court would have to weigh them against the relationships and stability Ren would lose. When Lauren read the report, she called me. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered, "You taught her to be afraid." "No, hello." My shoulders tightened. I walked to the kitchen sink and rested one hand against the counter. "I'm not discussing what Ren told Dr. Foster. She used your language." "I don't know what she said." "Don't lie to me." "I'm not. You think I don't know my own daughter?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and the fear beneath the anger made the call harder to dismiss. "I think you love her," I said. Lauren went silent. "And I think you got so sure about what was best that you stopped hearing the parts that didn't fit." Her breathing changed. "You have poisoned this entire process." "No. You brought Jonah back into her life. He was already there. You made my parents question me. They questioned dates. You turned Nolan's mother against me. I didn't make Maris see anything." Lauren laughed, sharp and breathless. "There. That's your whole strategy, isn't it? Stand there pretending you didn't do anything while everybody else does the damage." I closed my eyes. Months earlier, that accusation would have torn me open. Now I could hear the part of it that was true. I had stopped smoothing conflicts, interpreting people for one another, and helping Lauren keep every version aligned. "That hearing is coming," she said. "I know. I'm going to testify." The words carried a strange confidence. "I'm going to explain all of this." I opened my eyes. Lauren continued. "The missed visits, the school, your involvement, Ren's anxiety, Maris. Every piece of it has an explanation." I believed she could explain every piece. That was exactly the risk. In court, each explanation would become another statement that could be compared with dates, records, and what other people had actually heard. Lauren still believed coherence could make contradiction disappear. The morning of the relocation hearing, I woke before my alarm and lay in the dark, listening to rain tap against the bedroom window. For months, I had imagined this day as some kind of finish line. Instead, it felt like watching a family argument get translated into dates, schedules, records, and questions we should have been brave enough to ask around a kitchen table. By 7:30, I was outside the Pierce County Courthouse with a paper cup of coffee I could not drink. My hands were cold, even inside my coat pockets. Jonah arrived with his attorney a few minutes later. He looked like he had slept even less than I had. "You okay?" he asked. "No." He gave a tired nod. "Same." That was all. Lauren came through security with her attorney and Nolan. My parents followed behind them. For 1 second, the sight of all of us together almost made me laugh. It was the family Christmas photo nobody had wanted. Fluorescent lights, winter coats, and people avoiding eye contact. The courtroom was smaller and plainer than I expected. I had already answered the limited questions I was called for and was released to observe most of the remaining testimony. The judge entered, everyone stood, and the hearing narrowed months of family pain to one legal question. Could Lauren relocate Ren to Denmark over Jonah's objection? Lauren's attorney began with the genuine advantages of Copenhagen. Nolan's 3-year assignment, stable housing, strong schools, and a household Lauren believed could offer Ren more. Then the focus shifted to the cost of moving her existing school and relationships, the practical distance from Jonah, the fixed length of Nolan's assignment, and the fact that the plan had advanced before Ren understood it. Hearing both sides laid out together kept me from turning the case into punishment for Christmas. The court was weighing a whole life, not one betrayal. Jonah testified before Lauren. Watching him was uncomfortable. His attorney did not protect him from his failures. Neither did Lauren's. He had to admit missed weekends, work trips, and the times he had accepted Lauren's explanations instead of pushing to reschedule contact. I watched his jaw tighten as he answered. Lauren's attorney asked, "Would you agree that there were periods when you were not consistently exercising the residential time available to you?" "Yes." "Months?" "Yes." "And during those periods, Lauren was the parent carrying the daily burden." Jonah swallowed. "Yes." I felt something in my chest release. Not because the answer helped him, because it was true. He did not try to reshape it. His attorney then established the other side of the record. Support, parenting time he had exercised, messages seeking contact, and the more recent months when he had begun using the plan consistently. He did not look heroic. He looked accountable, which was harder to dismiss. When Lauren took the stand, I felt my whole body tighten. She looked composed. For the first several minutes, she sounded exactly the way she always had when she believed a room could be persuaded by organization. She described Copenhagen as stability. She said Ren liked Nolan. She talked about the school opportunities, the neighborhood, the apartment, the life they could build. She spoke about Jonah's inconsistency without exaggeration. She spoke about my relationship with Ren with careful restraint. Then came the part I had been waiting for, without wanting to admit I was waiting for it. Her attorney asked about Ren's resistance to moving. Lauren said Ren was anxious. Not opposed, anxious. She said Ren had become more fearful after spending increased time with me during the dispute. My throat went dry. Then Jonah's attorney stood. He did not attack her. He asked questions. That was worse. "Miss Hale, in your initial relocation materials, how did you characterize Brooke Hale's role in Ren's life?" Lauren shifted slightly. "As supportive extended family. Occasional child care?" "Yes." "Intermittent?" "I believe that wording was used." "And your testimony today is that Brooke became influential enough to substantially shape Ren's view of an international relocation?" Lauren hesitated. The silence was small, but I felt it. She became more involved after the conflict started. The attorney looked down at his notes. More involved than during the months when Ren was regularly staying overnight at Brooke's home? Lauren's face changed. Not dramatically, just a slight tightening around the mouth. That was childcare. How many nights in October? I don't remember. November? I'd have to look. December? Her attorney objected to the direction of the questioning. The judge allowed a narrower version. The questioning moved through travel dates, pickups, and texts. Some details corrected my own memory. Others confirmed how often Ren had stayed with me. What mattered was the contradiction Lauren had created for herself. She had minimized my role when describing Ren's support system, then enlarged it when explaining Ren's resistance. Jonah's attorney moved to another subject. What did Ren understand about the relocation before Christmas? Lauren said she had discussed Denmark generally. Did she know an international school application was being explored? Lauren paused. Not in detail. Did she know you were in Copenhagen to prepare for a potential move? She knew Nolan had work there. That wasn't my question. Something cold ran down my back. I had heard that sentence before. My sentence. Only now, it came from someone who had no history with Lauren and no reason to care about our childhood. Lauren looked toward the judge. I was trying not to overwhelm her. That answer was not monstrous. That was why the room stayed quiet. Then the attorney asked about the language describing Ren as enthusiastic. Lauren explained that Ren had expressed interest in Europe. She had liked photos, asked questions, talked about bicycles and schools. Did Ren ever say, in those words or words substantially like them, that she wanted to move to Denmark? Lauren took a breath. She was excited about aspects of it. Yes or no? My palms were slick. Lauren looked down. Not exactly. The judge simply made a note. Watching that small distinction enter the record was more powerful than any reaction in the room. Later, Maris testified carefully about the questions she had directed to Ren and the times Lauren answered first. She did not claim to know Lauren's intent. Then she said one sentence that made Lauren close her eyes. I realized I had heard many descriptions of Ren's excitement and almost none from Ren. Nolan sat absolutely still. I could not read his mind, but I watched him stop looking at Lauren. By the time the court recessed, my shoulders ached from holding tension. Dad approached me in the hallway. He looked older than he had at Christmas. Not physically, something else. He glanced toward Lauren at the far end of the corridor. Which version does she want me to defend? The question surprised me. I did not answer. He rubbed a hand over his face. She says you barely mattered. Then she says you mattered enough to turn Ren against Denmark. His voice was low. She says Jonah wasn't there. Then she says his renewed involvement is disrupting everything. I looked at him. For once, he did not ask me to explain Lauren. He was hearing the contradictions himself. The ruling came later, not with shouting, not with Lauren collapsing. The judge acknowledged the real benefits of Copenhagen and the legal presumption favoring relocation, then found that the combined impact on Ren's existing relationships, the difficulty of maintaining meaningful time with Jonah across that distance, her developmental needs and resistance, the alternatives available during Nolan's fixed-term assignment, and the credibility problems around how her wishes had been described were enough to overcome it. The relocation was denied at that time. Ren would remain in Washington. Lauren retained substantial residential time. Jonah received a structured path toward more time if he used it consistently, and major education decisions remained governed by the parenting plan. When the judge finished, Lauren did not look at me. Nolan did, only once. Then he followed Lauren out. Mom started crying quietly. Dad stood beside her without touching her. I felt no triumph, just exhaustion. And something like grief. Outside the courtroom, Mom came toward me. Brooke, we need to figure out how to bring everyone back together. The old sentence in a new coat. Dad joined her. Maybe you can talk to Jonah. Keep him from pushing too hard now, Mom added. And Ren needs to understand Lauren did this because she loves her. After everything, they were still handing me everybody else's feelings and asking me to make the pain easier to carry. This time, I recognized the job before I accepted it. I'm not doing that anymore. Mom blinked. Doing what? Translating everybody. Dad frowned. Brooke, nobody is asking. Yes, you are. My voice was calm. I will never again explain Ren to you. Explain you to Lauren. Or explain Lauren to Ren. Mom's face crumpled. But we're family. I looked back through the courthouse doors. Lauren was gone. Jonah was speaking quietly with his attorney. Nolan stood alone near the elevators. Nothing had been repaired, but the story no longer belonged to one person. If you want a relationship with Ren, I said, build one she doesn't need translated. Then I walked away before they could hand me one more thing to carry. For the first few weeks after the hearing, I kept waiting for victory to feel louder. It never did. There were no champagne bottles or triumphant phone calls. Mostly, there were schedules, pickup changes, and emails between lawyers that had nothing to do with me. Jonah started using every minute of the parenting time he was given. At first, I expected him to slip, not because I wanted him to fail, but because I had watched him explain missed weekends for too many years. Instead, he started showing up early, sometimes embarrassingly early. The first time he came to pick Ren up from my house, after the revised schedule took effect, he arrived 23 minutes before 5 and sat in his truck until I finally opened the front door. "You know you can come inside," I called. He looked at the dashboard clock. "I'm early." "You've been staring at my hydrangeas for 12 minutes. They're nice hydrangeas." "They're mostly dead." He got out of the truck. That was about as close as we came to discussing the fact that consistency had become something he was learning on purpose. Lauren, meanwhile, was still Ren's mother in all the ordinary ways that mattered: school mornings, orthodontist appointments, screen time arguments, and knowing which sweatshirt Ren would refuse to wear, even when every other one was dirty. The hearing had changed the move, not erased their relationship. Some days, Ren came to me angry with Lauren. Other days, she defended her. Once, when I made a careless comment about Lauren being late, Ren snapped. She had a meeting. The old version of me might have felt wounded. Instead, I said, "Okay," and let her defend her mother without making it a statement about me. Nolan postponed the Copenhagen household plan almost immediately after the hearing. I learned that from Mom, not from him. His assignment was still moving forward. He was still going to Denmark. But the engagement had been paused. Mom said Lauren was devastated. She also said Nolan needed time to understand everything. I did not ask for details. The strangest change was my guest room. For years, it had slowly turned into Ren's space without anyone deciding that should happen. A purple blanket, hair ties, markers, books under the bed, and a pair of sneakers she had outgrown but somehow refused to throw away. After the hearing, she stopped being there 3 or 4 nights a week. Her time was divided among Lauren, Jonah, school activities, and visits with me that sometimes ended before 8. The first Saturday, I stripped the bed and realized the sheets had been clean for almost 2 weeks. Grief hit me so fast, I had to sit down. I held one corner of the fitted sheet in my hand and stared at the little paper stars taped above the desk. I had spent months arguing that Ren was not something to possess, yet I had built part of my own identity around being the person she needed most. Admitting that hurt. I sat there for a while, then finished changing the sheets and left the room ready for the next time she chose to stay. A week later, Mom called and asked if she and Dad could come over. I knew before they arrived that the conversation would not be easy. Mom brought banana bread. She always brought food when she did not know what to say. Dad carried nothing. That was also very Dad. We sat in my living room while the banana bread remained untouched between us. Mom looked thinner than she had at Christmas. Dad looked tired. Neither looked ruined, and I was glad. I had never wanted ruin. I wanted them to stop calling hurtful choices practical. Mom folded her hands. "I owe you an apology." My body went still. She looked down. What I said at Christmas. I knew exactly what she meant. She swallowed. "Your sister is here already. That's enough family." Hearing the sentence again made my stomach tighten. Mom's eyes filled. I keep replaying it. "I said nothing," she continued. I was frustrated. Lauren had been crying. Nolan's family was there. Your father was trying to keep everything calm, and you called, and I thought... She stopped. "What?" Her mouth trembled. "I thought you would be okay." The sentence reached all the way back through years of smaller choices. I leaned back against the couch. "You thought I could take it?" "Yes." And Lauren couldn't. Mom closed her eyes. "I think I've done that to you for years." Dad shifted beside her. He looked like he wanted to object. He didn't. Mom wiped beneath one eye. I kept thinking that loving the child who needed more meant giving her more. I didn't notice when more started meaning you got less. The words hurt, not because they were wrong, because I had wanted to hear them for so long, that receiving them now felt almost too late to know what to do with. Dad finally spoke. Copenhagen really did look like a good opportunity. I almost smiled. Of course, that was where he went. I know. He looked surprised. I never said it wasn't. Dad rubbed his palms together. I still think some of this could have been handled without court. Maybe. He studied me. You agree? No. I think a lot of it could have been handled without court if people had been honest before lawyers were involved. He looked away. Mom reached toward the banana bread and then stopped. We want to see Ren more. I felt the air in the room change. There it was, the ask. She's been distant, Mom said, especially with Lauren. Everyone is walking on eggshells. Dad added, we were thinking maybe a long family weekend would help. Something normal. I waited. Mom looked at me hopefully. Maybe you could talk to her. The old reflex arrived immediately. Soften the request. Explain everybody's feelings. Find the compromise that made the weekend happen. I recognized the role and left it where it was. No, Mom blinked. No? You can invite her. Brooke. You can ask through Lauren and Jonah. You can tell Ren you love her. You can apologize to her directly. You can let her decide how she feels. Dad frowned. We're not asking her to decide anything. You're asking me to make her want what you want. That's not fair. It's exactly what you're asking. Mom's eyes filled again. She's 11. Yes. She needs guidance. Guidance isn't the same as pressure. Dad sat forward. But we're still family. I looked at him. For months, I had imagined the perfect response to that sentence. Something devastating. Something sharp enough to make him finally understand. When the moment came, I did not feel sharp. I felt tired and clear. Then act like being family is a relationship, not a vote you take when somebody becomes inconvenient. Dad stared at me. Mom looked down, and after several seconds, she gave one small nod. It was not forgiveness or resolution, only acknowledgement. When they left, I did not follow them to the driveway. I did not stand at the door wondering whether Dad was angry, text Mom to soften my tone, or rehearse a gentler version while washing dishes. I let them leave with their feelings and kept mine. By late spring, life had become ordinary enough to surprise me. One Saturday afternoon, Ren sat at my kitchen table painting a ceramic planter I had brought home from school. The pot leaned slightly to one side, because one of my students had shaped it on a wheel before giving up halfway through. Ren painted tiny yellow flowers around the rim. The base was uneven. So, I said, we're ignoring the structural problem. She did not look up. The plant will survive. That is not an engineering standard. It has experience with bad architecture. I laughed. She smiled without lifting her brush. Jonah was picking her up at 5. Lauren would have her the following week. The calendar on my refrigerator was full of visible plans now, rather than last-minute emergencies that made somebody else's time disappear. Ren dipped her brush into green paint. Then she asked, "Were you mad when Dad started getting more weekends?" The question caught me off guard. I sat across from her. Yes. She looked up. Really? Yeah. Why? I thought about lying. Not a big lie. A kind one. Then I remembered everything this family had survived because adults kept deciding which truths children could handle. Because I missed you. She waited. And because part of me liked being the place you came to most. Her brow furrowed. Is that bad? No. I looked at the crooked planter between us. But being sad about something doesn't give me the right to decide where you belong. Ren thought about that. Then she nodded and went back to painting. Ren nodded and went back to painting, accepting one honest sentence and moving on with her afternoon. I watched her for a while. For years, I had believed being easy to leave meant I had failed to become important enough to keep. My family had reinforced that belief every time they told themselves I would be fine. Maybe that was why Ren's question at Christmas had cut so deeply. Are you also abandoned like me? Back then, I thought the answer was about whether someone chose to stay. I understood it differently now. Love was not proved by how badly someone needed you. It was not proved by who got invited, who got chosen, who won the schedule, or whose house became the safest place. Love was whether you could make room for another person's truth, even when that truth changed the life you wanted. Wren held up the planter. "It's crooked." "Very." She grinned. "We're keeping it." I smiled. "Absolutely." And this time, keeping something did not mean owning it. It just meant making room for it to stay.